Hello and welcome to episode 39 of MMO Weekly. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, back from my little break there. Obviously, along with my co-host and MMO executive editor, Mike Mayer. Mike, I hope you didn't miss me too much last week, but Patrick did a great job filling in. Thanks to him for stepping in there.
No, yeah, I did a great job, and I'm excited. This is going to come out on opening day and finally have some real baseball.
I know, it's right. Opening day is tomorrow, Thursday, the 30th. It feels like we've been talking spring training stuff forever. Obviously had the WBC sprinkled in there, which was fun. But, just kind of initial thoughts out of camp here. I know we're going to, run through some topics, obviously, for things starting, but just kind of your initial thoughts here as, Mets closed up camp and obviously in Miami to take on the Marlins to open the season tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, outside of a couple of injuries in the bullpen, obviously the Edwin Diaz being the big one, the Mets made it through, I guess you can say, spring training relatively healthy. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Diaz is out for the year. Quintana is going to miss a large portion of the year, but I mean, these things are going to happen. There's going to be injuries. Luckily, I think the Mets are pretty well protected in the rotation. We'll get to that more. I think they have good depth in the bullpen at least. From a position player stand wise, they I mean, the Mets have essentially no injuries coming into the season. Nimmo had that little scare, but he's good to go now. Marte kind of started a little slow to spring from his groin surgery. He's good to go. Yeah, I mean, there's position player wise, the Mets are golden right now, which is obviously you'd love to see. And I mean, um, outside of a couple of positions, which again we're going to get talk about more, third base, catcher, um, maybe even DH. The rest of the spots are kind of thin depth wise, particularly in the outfield. So it's a good thing that Nimmo and Marte are ready to go for the season. Yeah, I mean the Mets. I mean, I think your expectations probably took a little bit of a hit with the Diaz injury, but this is still a team that's expected to be a contender for the division, contender for the World Series. I mean, um, they still got a very good team. They still have arguably the best team in the NL East, which we can talk about later too. But yeah, I mean, this is a team that's going to win a lot of ball games this year, and I mean, we're going to beat this dead horse, but it, I think even more so now, it's going to come down to Billy Epler at the deadline. This is really going to be him going for his job because with Diaz out, they're certainly going to need a bullpen arm at the deadline, even when they probably would have anyway. But you need more of an impact arm. Of course, that all depends on how Diaz is doing. I mean, he could have a super fast recovery and hopeful that he pitches the last season. Um, I wouldn't expect that, but hey, some pitchers have done that before. So yeah, I think you still, as a Met fan, still have to be super excited about the team that the Mets are going to put on the field on opening day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. Obviously, things take a little bit of a step back. Like you said, losing Diaz when you lose the best closer in baseball, it's obviously not a good thing. But they have some depth there to withstand that. Obviously, I think we've, didn't get to talk about it specifically last week, but I would assume that it'll be Robertson and Ottavino kind of holding down the fort there until the deadline closing games out. And if they have to, reacquire someone else, a bigger arm down the stretch there to do so, I think they will. But I think another theme, and we'll get to it, you talked about DH, third base catcher, that sort of thing, is how much power the Mets are going to have. Because I think last year, what seemed to really kind of bite them in the butt come playoff time is they got out homered. Mainly I guess by Trent Grisham in particular, but just the Padres in general out homered them, and was something that obviously through 162 was a lineup that manufactured a lot of runs, but once it got into crunch time in a short series, you see kind of how important the home run is and power is. So I'm just kind of curious. Obviously we'll get to it. Ruf getting DFA'd and them choosing Locastro over him, but interesting that Vientos gets sent down with that move coming because you think you want some power. So I guess kind of the theme for me is at those certain positions, and again we'll get into it more, but how much leeway do certain players have until the Mets feel like they need to not upgrade, but make a change at those positions with in-house that guys that could potentially give them a little more pop, if that makes sense.
Well, so I mean, Billy Epler kind of had the famous quote the other day of You don't want a bench full of big, hairy guys that hit the ball out of the ballpark that when you have a 3-0 lead, that you also need capable defenders. I guess that was a curious comment for me, considering the Mets don't really have a big, hairy power
Right.
hitter on the bench. I mean, um, Vogelback's going to start most days, and when he does, you're looking at a bench of whoever the backup catcher is that
Right.
day, Luis Guillorme, Tim Locastro, and um, the other DH spot. So yeah, I mean the Mets don't have that power bat off the bench, and even when Tommy Pham is the other name I just blanked on. I mean, so yeah, there's no big hairy power guy there. Um, Even when Vogelback's on the bench, he's not your like prototypical power
Right.
guy.
Right.
Um, he has a fair amount of pop, but he's not a big home run guy, and he's going to start against righties most of the time. You would have to think. So I found it curious that they that Epler said that, and the name you brought up, Mark Vientos, I mean, he's not necessarily too big or overly hairy, but he's certainly that power guy.
Right. Right.
Um, he was one of the better power bats in the minors last year, and um, in limited time last year in the majors, he showed some pop. This spring, he showed some pop. That's kind of his calling card. I mean, that's his best attribute is his
Right.
power. So I find it very interesting that Vientos got sent down, and then he makes that type of comment, and they go with a, a Locastro type.
Right.
I'm not saying Locastro doesn't have value. It's always good to have someone with speed on the team. It's always good to have someone who can play a solid defense in the outfield. I just I just don't think those types are needed throughout a season. They're fine as depth, but I don't think that's something you should seek out. I mean, Tim Locastro is essentially Travis Janikowski.
Right.
There's not a huge difference in the skill set there. Um, Locastro might be slightly the better hitter. I mean, you're talking really on the margins, and Janikowski's probably the little
Right.
bit of a better defender. Um, I don't think Locastro. I can't take away from the fact that he had a really good spring.
Sure.
Um, it's also spring, and
Right.
we have a track record of Locastro and what
Right.
he's done in the big
Sure.
leagues, and that's a 77 OPS plus.
Right.
That that doesn't help you at all offensively off the bench. My feeling is that it likely ends up like Janikowski. Janikowski
Yep.
had a couple of big games,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually his OPS is under 500, and you get DFA'd. Um, I think that's where that likely ends up.
Yep.
I mean, injuries and stuff can change that, but I think that's likely where it ends up. And then you end up adding a bat like Vientos or, I mean, other options that we're going to talk about. We might as well talk about Brett Baty at this
Sure.
point.
Sure.
The fact that the Mets decided to send him down and stay with Escobar as the starter at third base, which I think limits their offensive ceiling. And it limits their power. I think Brett Baty certainly has more power than Eduardo Escobar in this point in his career. And I believe that Baty is the better offensive player at this point in his career. I think the Mets made a mistake there. I know we talked about it a lot, not just in player wise, just that I think Baty is going to be the better player than Escobar. I think it's a big mistake for the Mets to let this competition continue to linger. I know I said that before, and I think it's a big deal because I think it would have said a lot for Brett Baty for the Mets to be like, "Hey, you're the starting third baseman on opening day." Um, I think that's where Brett Baty's going to end up.
Mm-hmm.
So why not? He showed in spring that he was ready. He showed defensively that he was able to improve and get to a
Sure.
point where you believe that he's at least going to be able to handle it at the same aspect that Escobar would at the very
Right.
least.
Right.
So I think the Mets made the mistake because I think not only does that get Baty into that mindset that he's the starting third baseman, it also gets Escobar into his role as a
Sure.
utility player, which again I think he's going to end up at some point anyway this season. So why not start off the season that way? And I mean, and you're certainly not making decisions based on marketing or anything like that, but you can kind of see like what the Cardinals did with Jordan Walker or
Sure.
what the Yankees did with Anthony Volpe. I mean, both of those players had
Mm-hmm.
really good springs,
Yep.
and
We're rewarded.
they were on the opening day roster, and that's all you've heard about for 3 days. Rightfully so. Those organizations have pushed both of those guys because they're really good young players. Um, Baty's kind of in that same level. I mean, ranking wise, Baty is very close in national publications to both of
Sure.
those guys. So I know Baty's a little bit different because he had a cup of coffee in the big leagues last year, but I
Right.
think,
Right. Right.
I mean, you see it on when the reports came out that Escobar had made the team as the third baseman and Baty was getting sent down. I mean, you could see it in Mets fans' comments that they were a little disappointed. I think we can certainly say a majority of Mets fans thought that Baty was going to be the third baseman. Uh, and yeah, I just think maybe this doesn't play a huge factor in the season. Escobar is likely still about a league average player. So
Right.
I mean, we're not talking this is like Todd Frazier at the end of his career, maybe, or I mean, some other guys we could mention. I think Escobar is at least going to be a serviceable player. I just think Baty had a chance to be a good player at third, and I think the Mets made the mistake there. And I think you can argue that the Mets made a mistake with Locastro over Vientos too, for the reasons I said. Locastro is the type of guy that a likely doesn't last on the roster without injuries, and B is always available on waivers.
Right.
Travis Janikowski was on the Mets, got DFA'd, went to Seattle, and then the Mets were able to get him back.
Right.
Those are the type of players that are always available on waivers, so you can claim them. It's good depth to have, but it's not something that you need in the organization. I mean, you don't have to protect that roster spot. Um, so I think you can argue that the Mets needed Vientos because now against lefties for the
Mm-hmm.
DH, what are
Sure.
they going to do? I don't think you want to put Locastro in that situation
Right.
because he's not a good hitter, and Tommy Pham hasn't been a good hitter in 2 years,
Sure. Sure.
and that trend continued this spring. He looked really bad this spring, um, and he doesn't have massive splits either, too, when it comes
Right.
to lefty. So I just think the Mets have kind of put themselves into a position where they didn't need to be. I think if you added Baty and or Vientos to
Mm-hmm.
this roster, one of the two, I think they would have been in a better position to score more runs and to have more power.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue there. As far as the LeCastro stuff goes, I wonder how much the new rules play a part in this, that they maybe wanted some speed on the bench and someone like him. Obviously, that's his game. That's really what he brings. So thinking maybe that's, something that they want because it is an older team. Maybe, like I said, with these new rules, late in games, you get speed off the bench. So when you need to get, steal your bag sort of thing. But again, the rough thing, it had to happen. I'm happy from the Mets perspective. Same thing with Cano last year, right? They admitted, whether they said it or not, that this trade did not work. So we're going to move on from this person to better the roster. I think that's great. That shows they continue to go in the right direction as far as that stuff goes. As
Well,
far
and they
as
did the same thing with James McCann too. So this
right,
is three
correct.
players that
Yep,
they've decided to do in the Steve Cohen era. So Cohen's already shown that this is different than the Wilpon era. If he has to eat money,
sure.
if he's going to because they need the roster spot is very important,
Yep.
and it is for the Mets. I mean, at least now they have whether it's Locastro, Vientos. At least now they have that roster spot for someone they feel gives them more value than Ruff.
No, absolutely. And, it's a shame it didn't work out. But I mean, even from last year, from the deadline, the amount of what they gave up to get him was pretty insane to begin with. But they live and learn there. Obviously, that's a mark on Epler. But again, I'm happy that they were able to cut bait and they didn't decide to, go in the season with him. But on the flip side, as far as with Baty, um, we talked about it, going into spring and all spring was, I thought best case was Brett Baty hits like crazy, plays great and beats out Escobar, forces the Mets hand to beat out Escobar. And I think he did that in theory. I mean, I think we're in agreement there that his play should have made him the opening day third baseman. I wonder how much Escobar being kind of that clubhouse guy, that veteran, that guy seemed to kind of gravitate toward to there, how much that played a role in it. But we're talking here about the bench too. Obviously, you talk about Locastro kind of being one of those bench guys now, over Vientos and Baty even. But if you make Baty that starting third baseman, and you kind of touched on it there, Escobar lengthens out the bench, in my opinion. Yeah, he doesn't have a ton of power, but a guy like that who doesn't play every day, and I think we saw last year, besides April and September, he was pretty much Valley for 4 months of the year, especially offensively. And I think someone that like him that maybe plays part-time could definitely benefit from that. And I just think it lengthens out the bench in general as far as what you're saying, as far as even a little bit more power, because the way they're looking right now, it's I know they don't have those big hairy guys, whatever. They don't have anybody right now. If, you got a one-run game, whatever it is that you want to throw up there to hopefully hit one out for you. I understand there's a balance, but I just wonder a little bit again, if the Mets forgot about how they lost last year. They lost last year because they got outslugged, and you need some power.
Well, and to your point too, Escobar's strength offensively is against left-handed pitching,
Right.
which is exactly what we're talking about that
Sure.
you're lacking. So yeah, so Baty I think improves you at third, and Escobar on the bench is certainly an upgrade over Locastro. So I think making that move would have helped the Mets twofold. And to kind of your point, yeah, we know Eduardo Escobar is loved in the clubhouse,
Right.
he's loved by the fan base as a person, and maybe that plays a role. And I mean, obviously, you don't want to upset the clubhouse, but I think at the same time you have to understand that it's likely going to happen at some point anyway.
Sure.
So Escobar's going to the dude. He's going to roll with it.
Right. It's
not going to be an issue for Escobar.
Yep.
And on the flip side of that, my issue with this, and we talked about it, this was going to be Buck's first chance of picking veteran versus rookie to see where he's going. I think it sends a really bad sign to young players that Brett Baty came in and did everything the Mets asked for him, between performing and working hard. He was always on the backfield working on his defense, and he showed improvement in the games. For me, I think it's a bad thing to show young players that, hey, you can go out there and work your butt off and perform the way you're supposed to, but we're still going to stick with the veteran player. I mean, look, Escobar, if we're talking spring, he didn't look good in spring.
No. He didn't look good in WBC either.
No, he didn't look good either place. And I mean, obviously, we're not just valuing him on that, but he didn't look good for most of last season. So I just think Buck is very cautious of this type of stuff, and I think he might have leaned veteran.
Yes.
And maybe that works out sometimes. Maybe it works this time. For me, it sends kind of a bad message to a player like Baty that he did everything that he was supposed to and then still didn't make the team. And maybe, I mean, there's a lot of people in that room making that decision.
Right.
Maybe Buck was, hey, I want Baty, and Epler and folks ahead of him just decided that it wasn't going to be that way. With Epler's comments, because he mentioned that Nolan Arenado played 400-ish games.
Yeah.
Rafael Devers played so many games at third base in the minor leagues, and Baty isn't close to that point. But for me, again, that sends a bad message because, A, you're talking about arbitrary numbers.
Sure.
There's not, if we're going to start putting numbers on before we get to call guys up, that just doesn't make any sense. From every player develops differently, every situation is different, so you can't put arbitrary number on it. And also, that makes it sound like you had it predetermined.
Yeah.
That Baty wasn't going to make the team, and for me, again, that kind of sends a bad message that you're determining before the young player comes into camp that he's not going to make it, which I don't think is a good message to send. So I didn't really like Epler's comments on it.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and I felt like I talked about a lot with the offseason as far as, it is a veteran-laden team. They've done that on purpose with the money that they've spent. It's a win-now team. They've done all that. But, we've talked about the youth movement in baseball, right? That teams like the Braves, and I hate to bring up the Braves, but they bring up their young players if they think that they're ready to contribute. And listen, they may not be fully developed. You had a guy like William Contreras last year who was an all-star catcher. He was not a great defensive catcher, but he could hit like crazy, and that's why they brought him up. Michael Harris, they brought up from, single A or double A, and wound up being the rookie of the year. If you have guys, and to your point, everyone does develop. differently, right? And I understand the point of like seasoning in the minor leagues. I understand that to a point. But again, if you have a player like Baty who succeeded at every level in the minor leagues that he's been in, and besides his cup of coffee last year, now especially this spring, I think that shows that he's ready to make that jump. So I agree with you there that that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But also, like, you brought up the Yankees. You took my point. I don't like to bring them up, but you know, two days after the Mets, or whatever, a couple of days after the Mets said that you know, Mets were putting Brett Baty down in minor league camp, you know, Anthony Volpe makes the major league roster. And I think a lot of people didn't think that was going to happen. Like the Yankees were going to, you know, play it safe, do the Super 2 thing, let him go down for a few weeks, then bring him up, whatever. But they rewarded the player, like you said, for doing all the right things. He forced their hand. And I think Baty really did a good job of doing that. But to your point, I guess it was predetermined, whatever. My curiosity is now, at what point Brett Baty becomes the starting third baseman for the Mets? I would assume Buck maybe gives Escobar a month, maybe. But I would think by early middle of May, that if Escobar's struggling and Baty's any semblance of a sub at AAA, which I would assume he would, which we'll talk about that AAA roster in a minute, because that might just be worth the ticket of admission before the big league club. But, you know, eventually, like, you got to reward the guy. And if he's your third baseman in the future, someday is going to have to be today at some point. And if you're trying to contend and he gives you the best option, then, you know, it's got to be it. And so I know we tried
that
to
was
be
kind of my
contrarian, but I
point
agree with you.
Yeah, that was kind of my point is where are they at? Like,
Right.
is Escobar getting 2 weeks if he's bad for 2 weeks? If he's bad for a month, like, this is a team that's supposed to win. So
Right.
you have to put the best players on the field, whether it's a 34-year-old or it's a 23-year-old. So how long are you going to let that play out?
And it's a team, to
Obviously,
your point too, that lost the best closer in baseball. So at this point, you kind of want to put Thump ahead of everything. I would think you'd want to try run producing at this point, making it a premium as much as you can. I don't know if I'm right there, but I feel like that would be a shift you'd want to do.
oh yeah, I mean certainly, I mean you want to score as many runs as possible anyway, but
Right.
yeah, I mean losing that type of shutdown closer, I mean you obviously get into a standpoint where your theory of how many runs you're going to prevent
Right.
has certainly gone up. So that
Sure.
means you have to do one of two things. You have to try to replace Edwin Diaz to get that similar run prevention, or you want to score more runs. And yeah, I think, like we said, I think we're both in agreement that
Yep.
Baty scores you more runs. Yeah, I just let's see how it plays out. I mean, hopefully for the Mets, Escobar just
Right.
does what he did in September. I mean,
Correct.
it's not that we don't like Eduardo Escobar or don't think he's going to be a productive part of this
Right.
team. I think Escobar is going to play a key role for the Mets, whether it's at third base or
Yeah.
off the bench. I think he's going to have some big hits this year, and he's a huge part of that clubhouse. So I don't want to keep kind of
Sure.
putting down Escobar, but I I do wonder just how far into the season it has to go. And yeah, hopefully Escobar gets off to a hot start, and we kind of just think about Beatty later in the year potentially
Right.
as like an extra hitting piece,
Sure.
or Vogelback gets hurt and you need a DH and Escobar can
Right.
DH and Beatty can. I mean, there's plenty of different options where Beatty comes up this year anyway, even if Escobar is playing well. Canna gets hurt and Beatty can play some left
Right.
field. I mean, there's a ton of different options that gets Beatty on the roster, even if Escobar isn't playing good. So obviously, you hope Escobar plays well. You hope Beatty plays well. But yeah, I mean that's going to be one of the storylines that we watch. Essentially, I mean Mets fans in this era of social media are going to be watching it on a daily basis of
Right.
how Escobar does in how
Yeah.
Escobar does with the Mets and Beatty
Yep.
does in Triple
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we haven't even, you know, brought up that we're talking about power, young guys. We didn't even bring up Alvarez. You know, obviously, we didn't see him a ton this spring. I don't think there's much to talk about it. He had the ankle surgery the offseason. I think the Mets kind of moved him on a little slowly for that. So everything went okay. I think we'll see all three of them at some point this year. Vientos, Baty, Alvarez. Again, who knows what Mauricio, maybe again, you know, talk about the power thing. Any of these guys shows they're lighting up AAA and, you know, certain positions struggling, maybe one of them come up, but I would assume of the three, it would, you know, it'll be Baty, Vientos, Alvarez, you know, together at some point this season, and what they contribute, we'll see. But hopefully Baty sooner than later. Obviously, we kind of talked about Locastro and Ruf. We went over Baty and Vientos. I did want to talk about Peterson winning the 5th starter spot, obviously over Tylor Megill. Just want to get your initial thoughts on that, how you thought he looked this spring, and the Mets' decision to make him the 5th starter over Megill to start the season at least. 5th starter, but 2nd in the rotation, I believe, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, Peterson's going to get the 2nd start of the year so that Verlander gets the 3rd start and he matches up for the home opener. Because essentially Buck kind of said otherwise it would have been Verlander 2, Senga 3, and then he was trying to lean away from having Senga's 1st start at home be the home opener. So he was trying to lean away from that. Plus, that kind of gives Senga that extra day too, where he had the finger issue. Just make sure it doesn't hurt to give him an extra day. So, and they had talked about splitting up Verlander and Scherzer for. I don't honestly remember the reason, but they had talked about splitting them up previously anyways. So, but yeah, to Peterson, I mean, between the two, I think he clearly looked better. Both of the guys, well, I would say Peterson struggled with control, and Tylor Megill kind of struggled with control and command. He walked a ton of guys, gave up a fair amount of runs. Peterson walked a bunch of guys, but didn't give up any hits or earned, a couple of hits. Yeah. Didn't give up any earned runs, and the strikeout count was up there. So, yeah, I think Peterson was a pretty clear choice there. Megill just doesn't seem like the same pitcher since he had that shoulder issue. Hopefully he bounces back because, look, the Mets are going to use 6-man rotation early in the season, it sounds like. So hopefully Megill kind of figures that out, and we'll see Friday. Syracuse Mets kick off the minor league season for the Mets minor leagues, and Megill's getting the opening day start for them. So, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, that'll be another thing to keep an eye on in one of the things you'll be watching for in AAA is just how good Megill does. Because look, the Mets are going to need more than 5 starters this year, so Megill's going to hopefully be healthy and play a role. And I think even got to kind of talk about Joey Lucchesi a little bit.
True.
He didn't pitch a ton this spring, and honestly, he didn't look great when he was out there. This is a guy that the Mets kind of took really slow with last year coming back from Tommy John. There was some thoughts the timeline matched up so that just based on the timeline of recoveries from Tommy John that he was likely going to pitch for the Mets at the end of the year, and they certainly could have used him at the end of the year. But for whatever reason, we don't know all the details. They took it pretty slow with him. And even this spring, they seemed to kind of protect him a little bit. Right. And when he was out there, he wasn't getting a lot of swings and misses. So he's going to go to the rotation for AAA too. So between Megill, Lucchesi, and Jose Butto, who's going to be in that rotation too, those are definitely all guys that, at some point are probably going to make starts for the Mets. So definitely guys to keep an eye on. But I think we can pretty much transition. I think you're in agreement with Peterson. So I think we can transition right to that Syracuse lineup. However they want to play it out, however Dick Scott wants to play the lineup card, he's going to have Mark Vientos, Francisco Alvarez, Brett Baty, and Ronnie Mauricio 1 through 4. I got to assume that Dick Scott is batting those guys 1 through 4, and then sprinkling in the Danny Mendics of the world and the outfield that they have there. But that 1 through 4, that lineup, I think you can put it up against, like the Oakland A's, the Cincinnati Reds with Joey Votto out.
Yeah.
Maybe the Nationals, the Pittsburgh Pirates. Between the rotation we just talked about and some of the bullpen arms they have with a lot of big league experience, those 4, that's 4 top 100 prospects or ish with Vientos and Mauricio right there. And Alvarez, one of the best prospects in baseball, and Baty in the top 20. So, if you put that team in a series against some of those teams I mentioned, the 7-game series, they're probably going to win some games.
Yeah,
That's a really tough lineup for any AAA pitcher to face.
sure.
So, yeah, I mean, kudos to Dick Scott for getting back in the managing game, and that's the lineup he gets to put out every day.
Yeah, it should be fun. They should win like a lot of games, and they should be really hot and be real hot so they can come up to Flushing and help the big league club. That's the hope. They keep their confidence up. That should be a lot of fun to watch. And the Cyclones roster is going to be fun. I was looking at it before. It might be trying to hit some games at Coney Island this summer. Watch Kevin Parada and the boys do their thing. That might be a fun team to watch as well.
Yeah, Kevin Parada, first rounder from last year, got Blade Tidwell, second
Mm-hmm.
rounder. Alex Ramirez, arguably the Mets' fourth, fifth best prospect, depending on the ranking. Some people had him in the top 100. Keith Law did, and a couple other publications did. Yeah, that's a pretty good Brooklyn roster too. Um, Binghamton's roster came out today too, and they have Mike Fassel and Dominic Hamill,
Mm-hmm.
two of the Mets' better pitching prospects. I have them ranked Fassel as the Mets' number 2 pitching prospect, and Hamill number 3, both of them behind Tidwell, who you mentioned. So those are kind of the guys to watch in Binghamton. And we don't have the St. Lucie official roster yet, but Jet Williams is going to be on that team, I was
Great
told by
name.
sources. So, I mean, great name. And I mean, he was one of the best, just pure hitters, bat to
Yeah,
ball skills in the draft last
sure.
year. He's still only 19, so he's going to be playing shortstop for the St. Lucie Mets. So, I mean, already, I mean, that's pretty much worth your price of admission right there to see a first rounder play in St. Lucie, coming off them winning their championship
Sure.
last year. So, yeah, it's good to see. I mean, you got a little bit of the prospects sprinkled at each level this year. It'll be interesting to see. I think Binghamton will probably get a little stronger as the year goes on the offensive category, because I got to believe that the Mets are going to be aggressive with Parada and Ramirez.
Sure.
They were both in Major League Camp this year. They both looked good in Major League Camp, so I think both of those guys, if they have a good showing early in the season, they'll finish up the year in Binghamton. So those guys are definitely keep an eye on. And yeah, Brooklyn roster has also got like William Lugo, Stanley Consuegra, Omar De Los Santos. I mean, it's got some of the, like, these guys are in the 15 to 30 prospect range of the Mets.
Right.
So yeah, that Brooklyn team is going to be pretty fun to watch. So I know a lot of Mets fans live in that area. Definitely would check them out before some of those guys get bumped up to Binghamton.
Yeah, that's a cool part about minor league baseball, right? You see stars of the future. Luckily, between Syracuse and Brooklyn, you got two areas covered there if you're in certain spots of the state, but it's cool. The youth movement with the Mets, I feel like we've been talking about forever now. We've had so many people on from the organization. It's going to be fun. We see some of these guys finally come up and produce at the big league level for good, but it's cool to see that they have, some good rosters here and should expect some success at the minor league level. But I want to transition from that to kind of another injury-related news. Guy who was in the minor leagues and was, had a great spring. Bryce Montez de Octa. He's going to go undergo arthroscopic surgery on his right elbow, throwing elbow, to remove bone chips. It's like 4 months or whatever recovery, like maybe mid-August. Another kind of blow to the Mets bullpen there. Guy who had a great spring. I just want to get your initial thoughts because he's someone that you've been talking on the show for a while about too.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a big hit for the Mets because, like we talked about, once Diaz went down, we already knew about Dioka having an issue, but at the time we thought it was just a stress reaction, which was
Sure.
essentially shut down for a month, get back to throwing. So you hope he's going to be there May or June, and he's going to be in that bullpen. And he's the type of guy we've talked about that has closer stuff, and that's what they need. Now, yeah, I mean, essentially, we're talking late in the season, and that's if all goes well. This is now a guy that's had Tommy John. He's had shoulder surgery. He's now having elbow surgery. It tough break for him. This is a guy that's been through a lot. The surgeries I mentioned. He also had back surgery and a blood clot issue too. So it's a tough break for him. And Sam Coonrod too, a guy that looked great this spring. He was throwing hard too. He's up to 99. and just read the other day that essentially he's going to be shut down until at least June. So I mean that's another bullpen piece where that you had hoped he was going to be able to kind of try to
Yeah.
fill that Diaz void. So both of those guys are going to be out for a little bit, and you just have to. Buck's going to have to mix and match, and we'll see if the Mets play the claim game late in
Sure.
spring. There's a lot of guys that go on waivers this time of spring. There's veterans that opt out of deals this time of spring. So we'll have to see if the Mets play in that area at all. They already picked up Dennis Santana off waivers, like we
Right.
talked about. He pitched a couple of scoreless innings, and it looks like he's going to make the opening day roster, depending on any like late movements. The Mets will have some roster spots available because you can start putting guys on the 60. Edwin Diaz can go on the 60. Now we know Bryce Montez de Oca
Right.
can go on the 60. Quintana can go on the 60-day injured list. Probably Sam Coonrod can
Right.
too. So that's you need to create one spot for Castro, but it going through those guys, you're probably pretty easily having three more spots that you can use to claim a guy or make a trade on the back end of the roster too for. So yeah, I mean the bullpen, I would say the bullpen is certainly where the Mets have been hit the hardest with the early injuries. But like we said, you still got David Robinson, still got Adam Ottavino, Brooks Raley looks healthy. You still got Drew Smith, and then Dennis Santana. We talked about Steven Nagosic, and then they got some guys at AAA that I mean that pitched pretty well this spring. I mean, a guy
Sure.
like Grant Hartwood pitched really well this spring after having a great year last year. Jimmy Yacobonis
Mm-hmm.
had a pretty good spring too until his last outing. Zach Muckenhern didn't give up a single earned run this spring, and he'll be in AAA. So they do at least have some guys at AAA that you can call up. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it the bullpen is always. I mean, that's always where teams are going to have struggles, right?
Sure.
Just keeping it consistent. And once Diaz went down, you knew it was going to be kind of a constant mix and match for Buck all year.
Yeah, it's another thing that stinks, right? Like you said, bullpen, kind of another injury there. I wonder how all this kind of stuff, especially the Diaz injury, if the Mets starters saw that and said, "Oh, maybe we need to start getting a little length out of us this year." Maybe that'll be something Buck tries at points. Starters can length them out a little bit to ease kind of the bridge to the back end of the bullpen there. But be interesting to see. There's a guy in Cincinnati who happens to be related to the Mets closer that's hurt right now that might look good in orange and blue come July or August. So we'll see how that goes there. But I want to transition kind of from the on the field stuff to Rob Manfred made more comments that Steve Cohen is too rich and spends too much money. So I want to get your thoughts on that real quick. It's more of the same stuff, just the disparity of spending and how it hurts the other teams from this, and it creates a competitive disadvantage. Again, read between the lines. I'm mad that this owner's spending money because now the other owners can't say they don't have to spend money. I don't know what's going to happen in the next CBA. I know they did the Cohen tax and all this stuff in last year to try and slow them down. Things are going to be changing in the next 4 years whenever the next CBA is up. I don't know if it's going to be what the NFL does with the salary cap, or there's going to be harsher penalties, whatever it is. But they're going to try and level the playing field quotations. They're going to try and make it harder for Cohen to spend like this. That's just what this all feels like. I don't know how your feelings are with all this. For me, it's twofold. One, I think Cohen knows what's coming, that they're going to try and slow him down in a few years, and he's going to look to just spend as much as he possibly can on any good acquisition in the next few years. Fingers crossed, hopefully, whatever. But I just want to get your thoughts on the comments. Are you tired of hearing the same crap over and over again? And do you think that this is all just kind of leading up to that they're going to try and neutralize his money as much as they can in the next few years?
Well, I would say first, Cohen spending is good for baseball.
Yes, it is. Very
and
good.
It's also I feel like Cohen, because he owns a team in New York, is kind of being singled out too.
Sure.
And he shouldn't be singled out, not just because he's in New York, but not because he should be spending money. That's what an owner should do.
Right.
But the San Diego Padres are spending like crazy too, which is great.
Great
The
for the
Texas
sport.
Rangers are spending like crazy too. That's great for the sport. The Phillies have given
Yeah,
out a lot of big contracts recently.
absolutely.
Great. That's really great for baseball. All of that's great for baseball. What's not great for baseball is the Reds going into opening day with like a $40 million
Right.
payroll. I put a tweet out there today that Joey Votto is making 25 million. He's their number one, but he's not even going to be on the opening day roster. Their second highest paid, no, paid who they have to pay this year is Mike Moustakas,
Hmm.
18 million. He's playing for the Rockies. He's not playing for the Reds.
And who's the
Their third
third
highest,
guy? Hit me with the third guy.
Will Myers is the third guy,
And who's the fourth,
but
Mike?
Ken Griffey Jr. He's the hitting coach for Team USA in the WBC. So two of the four top highest paid people that they have to pay this year aren't even in the organization. One's playing for the Rockies as a bench player, and the other is a hitting coach for Team USA. Um, and that look, that's nothing against Griffey. It just
No.
kind of points out how
Yeah.
ridiculous the fact that a major league team is allowed to go into the season with even when they're healthy and all the other players is 83 million. Um, that's not you can't try. It's very very difficult to be competitive at that price range.
Unless you're the
But
Tampa Bay Rays, that's
yeah,
about the only team that's able to
th-
pull that off.
that's why I didn't say impossible because the Rays have a system in place and they
Right.
are able to do that. The Reds don't have that system. The Pirates don't have that system. The
Right.
A's don't. The Nationals don't. The Rockies don't. I mean, we can keep going on and on because the Rays are a unicorn. That's not to be like, oh, hey, you don't have to spend money. The Rays are a unicorn. Um, Teams like the Reds need to spend more money on their team. That's the issue. There needs to be a salary floor, if anything. And I've said
Absolutely.
that before, and I'll continue to say it.
Hmm.
I mean, I Kevin, I mean, Kevin Newman is going to be their like number four paid active player.
Right.
Luis Cessa, who used to be a Mets farm
Yep.
hand, was traded for Cespedes, is making 2.6 million, and he's their fifth highest player. Like it just they had a lot of needs this offseason and just didn't spend any money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same way with the Rockies. I mean, the
Right.
Rockies spent almost no money this offseason until Profar kind of fell into their lap
Right.
at the end. The Pirates didn't spend any money. I mean, even we should talk about the Orioles too.
Sure.
The fact that they were a contender last year and
Right.
are ready to contend this year,
Yep.
and supposedly we're going to spend and just didn't spend, and now they're holding down Grayson Rodriguez to start the year too, one of the best pitching prospects in baseball.
Right.
Um, and they have a convenient excuse that he looked bad in a couple of starts in spring training, and they're still starting Kyle Gibson as their opening day starter. Like that's the state of their rotation,
Right.
and they're not going to have one of the best pitching prospects in baseball in their rotation. And we could talk about the Angels too. Artie Moreno, it
I was just
came,
about to say that.
came out today that the Angels still are not going to pay for their radio guys to travel with the team so that they can actually be at the games to call them. So they're calling the games remotely like we had back in the COVID year.
Right.
The Angels are still doing this, and Marino admitted that it was a cost-cutting
Yeah.
measure. This is a team that wants to afford Shohei Ohtani. I guess if you're
Right.
cutting all the corners, I, I, I don't know what to say other than the fact that if anyone is looking at Steve Cohen or the Padres owner or the Phillies owner as the
Right.
issue, they're looking at the wrong guys. They need to be
Correct.
looking at Artie Moreno,
Yeah.
the Reds ownership, Pirates ownership, definitely the A's ownership, and that entire situation that they
Sure.
have going on there. Um, those are the real issues with baseball.
Yeah.
Is those billionaires that are making profits. By the way, Cohen took a loss on the Mets last year.
Right.
So, and he was willing to take that because he wanted to put a competitive team out there.
Right.
That's what a good owner does.
Right. Well, we've talked about it. Owning sports is not a typical business. If you own a sports franchise just to make money, you're in the wrong business. You should own a bunch of Chick-fil-A's or something if that's what you want to do. Don't own a professional sports franchise. And again, these owners, the small-time owners like we're talking about, like the Marinos of the world, the people who own the A's and the Reds, in public, they cry that Steve Cohen's buying them out of the sport. They can't compete. But behind closed doors, all those penalties that Steve Cohen is paying goes right into their pockets, and they love it. So it's, it's cry wolf to a point. They're just more mad that somebody came in and said, you can spend and win. You can do it. You can absolutely do it. And it, I think, pushed other teams like the Padres to say, you know what? Let's go all in. If we show that we're spending money, fans are going to spend, or they're going to spend their money on us. And that's what you do. Winning does that. Winning makes you money.
And it also shows, I think the Padres are the perfect example, more so than Steve Cohen, because it shows that small market is a mindset. Correct. San Diego's not a baseball market. No. It's not a big market, but that hasn't stopped the Padres owner from spending it. Because
the Kansas City Royals sold for almost $2 billion 3-4 years ago, whatever it was. Yeah. And that's about as small a market, quote unquote, as you can have. These teams are worth money. They have money. These owners just have to be willing to take it out of their pockets. And most of them don't want to do that. So they make convenient excuses like you're talking about. And team like the Padres, owners that, the ownership group of the Padres, Steve Cohen, these people are coming in and saying, I'd rather put a better product out on the field because I think it'll make my franchise more money in the long term. It makes everybody happy. It makes the fans happy. It makes them happy. And look at what Steve Cohen's doing, not to get on a tangent here, but he's making the Mets and Citi Field into a destination. He wants to revamp that whole area. He wants to turn it into a place that you just don't go to a ball game and go home to. You go there for a whole dinner, for a whole show, for a whole experience. They're a brand. They're more than a team, right? And people like Cohen and the people on the Padres, they understand that. At least they're starting to. So, it's, I guess, I think it's easy. I think any team can, if you're willing to commit to win and want to spend, you can do it. But clearly the effort that's put in is what is the separator, I guess. But I'm happy that the Mets have someone who's willing to do that. And there's other markets like the Padres and such, the Phillies. It stinks they all just happen to be in the National League and the Mets are also good. That's a side tangent. But it's great for the sport. Keep spending. Keep showing that you want to invest in players that are over the age of 30 that can still play, that sort of thing. It's all good for the sport. These guys can moan, in silence, whatever. And again, I don't know what they're going to do in a few years to try and bring, to try and level the playing field, so to speak. But hopefully these teams like the Mets and Padres and stuff keep doing what they're doing because it makes people talk about the sport. It gets buzz, and it's just exciting in general to see these good teams.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we're in full agreement there. And so kind of thinking about Wilpon Mets,
Sure.
a player from that era, Daniel Murphy today, out of nowhere, came out of retirement, his very brief retirement, and signed with the Long Island Ducks. I mean, we're talking New York baseball, right?
Right.
So Long Island Ducks.
Bethpage Park, baby.
Guess who's another infielder for the Long Island Ducks?
It's
Ruben Tejada. So Ruben Tejada
again up the middle.
It's unbelievable. I think it's like for Murphy, it's weird. It's just weird, interesting, awesome all at the same time because look, players go to the Ducks all the time that have kind of fallen off the end of their career. Yep. Ruben Tejada, but players of Daniel, players that had the career of Daniel Murphy
don't usually
don't usually do that. And so very interesting from him. It sounded like he had some quotes today where he was just, it was itching at him. He wanted to play baseball.
Right.
It was itching at him and he wants to keep playing. So I don't think this is where he wants to end. I think Daniel Murphy being Daniel Murphy is like, well, this is where I need to start because I'm 37 and I retired. So who's better to give me a chance than the Long Island Ducks?
Right.
And he mentioned wanting to play in New York again. He loved playing in New York. So I think this is him wanting to get back into the major leagues. I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I mean,
and the way he kind of said it was like he feels that the tweaks and that he made to his body and his mechanics, he can still do certain things. And he wasn't saying specifically, but obviously that means he thinks he could still hit. At least DH.
Oh
That's
yeah.
what I think that means. So maybe,
Hey,
interesting. He took a couple of years off. Maybe his body needed some time to like heal or something like that. We know as Met fans, even before he kind of became Babe Ruth in 2015, his bat to ball skills were the best, some of the best in baseball. He was always a great spray hitter and things like that, a great hand-eye coordination. So be interesting to see. Sell some tickets for them
look,
out in Bethpage.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we saw it kind of last year with Matt Carpenter
Sure.
around the same age, where
Yep.
he went, made some changes to his
Right.
swing, made some changes to his approach, and he was one of the, I mean, outside of
Sure.
Judge, obviously, he was one of the Yankees' better hitters last year, and is now on the Padres. But yeah, I mean, anything can happen from that type of person that
Right.
already has a really good skill set to fall back onto. And
Yeah.
like you said, it's just an awesome thing for New York baseball. I mean, you can now go to the Ducks game and watch Daniel Murphy and
Yeah.
Ruben Tejada play in the same team. Nelson Figueroa is the pitching coach, and another 86 Met that I don't really like talking about is the manager. And
Wally.
so,
Yes. Yes.
but yeah, you got a lot of draw there
Yeah,
as Mets
absolutely.
fans, and that's really cool for that fan base and
Yeah.
anyone who wants to go to that team. And
Sure.
I mean, look, Tejada and Tejada and Murphy want to get back to the big leagues, and I mean, what we saw from Tejada in the
Played
WBC,
well.
I I wouldn't be surprised if he
Yeah.
ends up in the minor leagues at
Sure.
least at some point this year. And look, someone will take a chance on Murphy if he's hitting with the Ducks too. I
Yeah.
mean, again, with his pedigree, and not just that, he's kind of a coach on the bench
Right.
anyway.
Sure.
Talking hitting,
Sure.
he's just a database when it comes to hitting. So I think that type of guy is great to have on the bench. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting and fun, and that certainly not the news I was expecting today.
No, not at all. And I'm pretty sure if it all works out for him and he makes it to the majors again, whatever, I'm pretty sure there's only one other person that's played in an old timers game and then signed a major league contract. I forget who it was, and it was like with the Yankees a long, long time ago. So he would join one other person. I don't know how likely that all is, but you never count anything out with Murph, especially if he's confident with the bat. We know what he could do. So wish him luck there. And like I said, if you're out in East Islip or anything like that, go to Bethpage Ballpark. Ducks are a lot of fun. I'm gonna try and catch a game. Go catch Murph and them there. But I want to move on. Wrap the show up real quick. Move on from all that back to the Major League Mets. I want to get your season prediction, Mike. Give me a win total, what you think is going to happen here, and we'll wrap the show up like that.
Oof, that's tough. So yeah, opening day today, Max Scherzer versus Andy Alcantara.
Love that.
Yeah, I mean, tough to start the year with a better matchup.
Yep.
That's just a great start. But yeah, I mean, kind of start the Mets kind of have a weird schedule to start the year where
Sure.
they're playing a bunch of games on the road and then a lot of them in the West Coast. And then they have a lot of games to start the year. I think Fox said it was like 50 games in 54 days. So that's going to be a really important stretch for them. And we'll kind of see give us a real good kind of ballpark of where they're at. I, I Before Diaz got hurt and kind of
Mm-hmm.
these other little small
Mm-hmm.
injuries, I think this was a very good chance that it was a 100-win team. I think it's got to be slightly downgraded with Diaz out and some of the depth pieces there not available. Quintana out. I know Peterson is a very good replacement for him, but that's still it just weakens your depth, and Quintana's going to be out for a while. So um, I'm going to go 96. I think the
Okay.
Mets win 96 games. I still I I don't know if they win the division. I mean that's tough to predict. I think that puts them right there. I mean,
Sure.
the Braves still have a really good team. I don't think they necessarily downgraded a ton besides Swanson at shortstop, and I didn't really like their move going with Arcia
Mm-hmm.
as the starting shortstop. I thought that was kind of weird given the options. Um, but I mean, they somehow improved at catcher with Sean Murphy, got one of the best in baseball.
A good
Um,
deal. That's how they do it.
so I think, yeah, I think the Braves are going to be right around that 96 wins, and I think the Phillies are a really good team again.
Yep. Yep.
Again, there's no significant big losses there, and they added Trey Turner,
Right.
um, one of the best players in baseball,
Right.
um, who I think was kind of underrated until the
Sure. Sure.
WBC stuff. Um, but yeah, I think, and the Phillies added some arms. They have Taiwan Walker in the rotation. Um, yeah, I think that's a team that wins around 90 games too. So
Yep.
it's going to be a really tough fought division, just like it was last year. And I think it'll really just, there's a good chance again that all three of them make the postseason, and it's just kind of where they are um, playing once they get to the postseason. But yeah,
Sure.
I'll go with 96 wins for the Mets.
All right, before Diaz, I would have been right there with you. But the way kind of everything is right now, I have them between 88 and 90 wins. I'll call it 89. I see them winning. I could see them winning the division still, but I see more second or third in the division just because I think it's going to be a dogfight, like you said, with the Braves and the Phillies. They're going to get into the playoffs as one of the wild card teams at the least, I believe, and I think they'll win a round. Whether that it's a wild card or division round, whether that is, I think they will advance in the postseason. I don't know if they're going to be able to make it to a pennant or a World Series just because the NL is just so freaking stacked. Padres are awesome. We know about the NL East. Can't forget about the Dodgers. Or NL Central, Cardinals, they're a regular season team. They never do anything in the playoffs now. Cubs could surprise some people. But yeah, I have the Mets at 80. I was going to say 89 wins. They will I believe they'll make the playoffs. I think it's going to be tough to win the division without Diaz, and especially also the balanced schedule. You don't get to beat up on the Nats 19 times a year. I think that'll play a little bit of a role. But this is a playoff team no matter what. Hopefully they can kind of, starting pitching stays healthy, carries them along with the offense, and see what they can do come October. But I think this is still, no matter what, I think this is still a playoff team.
And I'll give you one more prediction. I think that Lindor goes 30-30 this year.
I think
I,
Lindor is
I
going to have a tremendous year. I think he's going to
yeah,
finish top 3 or 4 in the MVP voting. I really do.
I think so too. And I just think he's one of those players that, I mean, he runs a little bit anyway, but I think
Sure.
he's one of those guys that's gonna take advantage of the new rules. And I just, even last year, I mean, he dealt with some health
Yep.
issues last year, and
If he doesn't
was
break his
one of the,
finger, he might win the MVP last year if he doesn't break his finger
yeah,
in June.
he was one of the best players in baseball last
Huh?
year. So I think, I mean, assuming that he stays healthy, I think he's going to be a 30-30 guy. Like he said, I think I would predict that he's going to be top 3, 4 in the MVP too. I just think he's due for a monster year.
Yeah.
Um,
He's
and
comfortable
that
in New York now. Year 2 showed that. He loves being here now. He loves being a Met, part of this organization. And I think all that kind of comfort now, and it's the way things kind of ended last year, I think he's got a chip on his shoulder. He wants to win something here. I really believe that. Obviously, they all do. But I think with the big deal and everything, and now that he's really settled in here and likes being a Met, I think he really, really wants to win. And I think it's going to be a big year for him. Hopefully, everybody else follows suits. I think the usual suspects will be just fine. Alonso, McNeil, all those dudes will be just where they are. But hopefully the pitching can hold up for them in the long haul, and they can, hit a little bit, some more homers there down the stretch. But they're going to be a good team. Should be fun. In a month from now, if they haven't won a game, we have reserved the right to change our minds for everything. But I don't think we'll have to worry too much. But I think we're going to wrap the show up here now with that. Opening day, exciting. Everybody's great. Everybody's undefeated starting tomorrow. This is why we love baseball. Springtime's here. Mets fans, enjoy it. Enjoy having your team back. Enjoy having Gary, Keith, and Ron back for a whole year. That's almost better in itself sometimes. But we're all excited. We'll be back here next week with you, wrapping up the first week of the regular season. But until then, guys, happy opening day, and let's go Mets.